Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Very warm welcome again. Beautifully introduced there by a lady with a French accent. Sounded very pleasant indeed. So a very warm welcome to you all. I've been asked to provide a bit of an update on what we do as a risk control working group, but I'm not going to spend too much time on that. Maybe have a little bit of a look at what we do and how we go about it. But then I want to take maybe a closer look at some of the documents that have recently been published or are just about to be published or are in the process of being developed, just to give you all a bit of a heads up as to what we're working on at the moment. And then maybe a bit of a look forward and a request for assistance. So thanks all for attending. I'll press straight on. He says, not making the presentation function. The steering group is very lucky in as much as it has a really broad representation across the insurance markets, and I've just listed those organisations that currently participate in the work of the steering group, and I suppose just for the sake of simplicity, it's worth, I suppose, explaining how we do things. In real terms, ideas for new documents appear, or revisions to old ones, and we'll come on to that bit in a moment. But ideas for new documents appear. They're approved and agreed by way of a proposal by the steering group. Then the work is, a document or whatever it is we're working on is drafted, and then we go through 2 or 3 iterations of external consultation, updates at meetings until we reach the final published document. And it's without the support of the individuals representing these organisations, we really would struggle. And it also gives a great opportunity for them to be able to steer what we're doing, make sure that we're saying what needs to be said and in the right way, and covering those issues that are of most significant concern from a risk perspective. So we've got a really good team of people. Some members of the steering group have been on there since the start, back in 2002, 2003, when FBA first took over the administration of the scheme. So they certainly do deserve congratulation for their perseverance, if nothing else. But we also have a lot of newer participants and younger people. So it's a really good mix that we have on the steering groups, and they're all very much actively involved, which is greatly appreciated. In addition to, obviously, to the insurer representation, we also have representatives from the FPA. I convene the group. My colleague Adair Lewis does a lot of the technical work. Dominic does the administration. Caroline keeps us all in order and tells us what we should and shouldn't be doing from time to time. And we also have access to individuals from CFOA, which can come in real handy at times, particularly when you're dealing with issues associated with firefighting. So what is the purpose of the group? Well, in simple terms, to oversee and direct the development of loss prevention and risk control guidance, principally for industrial and commercial processes and systems. Sometimes a more domestic environment might get touched upon, but principally we focused our efforts away onto industrial and commercial processes and systems, as that's the sort of issues or the sort of premises that you're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. And what we're trying to achieve is making sure that the existing advice that we offer remains current and it's fit for purpose and it's reflective of best practice and current standards, that we monitor issues related to loss and loss experience and make sure that we're acting on those as we need to, and then also providing the information in a form that is suitable for use not just by insurance industry professionals but also other end users. So what we're really hoping for is that we can produce documents that the end user can use, somebody who's managing a process or managing a type of premises or managing a particular risk can read, can understand, and it's easily and simply digestible, whilst giving them all of the information that they need in one place. We need to be able to respond quickly to things and to make sure that we can tackle issues as and when they become a problem, and having a wide steering group and having access to the technical experience within the organisation and technical expertise within the FPA really does make a difference. But it's very much a collaborative approach. We get lots of great information from insurers which help us develop these documents and make sure they're steered in the right direction. But there's a few examples of some of the documents that have resulted from concerns and developing issues. For example, we have documents that focused on fire safety recycling centres, RC54, due to the number of fires that were seen in those locations. Fire safety in saunas, which again was a response to a series of incidents that happened. We produced a document on biodiesel manufacturing right at the start of when that first, I suppose, ad hoc industry first emerged, to make sure that there was some guidance out there, because in real terms there was very, very little that told people how to do it safely, and hence there were a significant number of incidents, injuries and even deaths as a result of people doing things improperly. Things have moved on a little bit now, but and we'll touch on that in a little bit later. And also we have a document on managing fire detection alarm systems and minimising the false fire alarm and unwanted fire signals, and that's in response to the document that CFAR produced on managing unwanted fire signals, and then the subsequent decisions by fire and rescue services to, in some cases, work alongside the CFAR recommendations, but in an awful lot of other cases they decided to do their own thing. So we needed something that, a document that would give people a really good steer as to how to manage things effectively, regardless of what kind of response they were likely to get from fire and rescue services to an unwanted fire signal. And the sort of stuff that we tackle is quite broad, but all predominantly fire safety related. We tend to try and avoid anything that's health and safety driven, unless absolutely necessary, although there are, as always, a number of anomalies in that respect. And then occasionally we stray away from direct fire safety. We've got an RC on Legionella in sprinkler systems, for example, so it's not entirely unrelated to fire, but neither is it specifically a fire safety risk, if that makes any sense. So within the existing suite of documents that we have, there's around 57 current documents at the moment, numbered anywhere from number 1 to number 63, which seems a little bit strange, but the anomalies are due to a whole range of different things: numbering inconsistencies, where we've renumbered some documents, other titles have been withdrawn or superseded and replaced. I've just got a few examples there. RC2 was called Builders and or Contractors Operations, sorry for the typo there, was last published in 1980, and the Joint Code of Practice for Fire Prevention on Construction Sites has very much superseded that. RC20 A, B and C, decision was taken that we didn't like A, Bs and Cs in particular, and having documents written in past, so they've been renumbered as RCs 55, 56 and 57. RC6 on the storage, use and filling of LPG in containers was withdrawn, and that's been replaced by another series of recommendations. And then we also have some other strange anomalies. RC22, RC23 and RC24 just do not appear to exist. Now, if there's any old hands out there who may have copies of such documents, we'd be delighted to see them and find out what they were about. But everything we've been able to track down from our own records and from those that we brought with us from LPC back in the dim and distant past seem to indicate that they don't exist. And so what we're really trying to do, I suppose, in the production of these documents is to distill best practice, distill guidance and standards down into a usable form, something that people can understand, can simply and quickly apply, and which are as broadly applicable as possible. Now, they're not hard and fast rules. Every insurer has the opportunity to append, amend, or do whatever they like with the documents if they choose to, and even if they, in some cases, may tend to ignore them and just plough their own furrow, which is absolutely fine. But at the end of the day, we have some very, very useful guidance, all freely available, which hopefully the world and his wife can make best use of. We also do other bits and pieces which fall outside of the, I suppose, that aren't direct risk control publications. I've just highlighted a few on the screen now. Obviously, one of the principal documents that we're responsible for is the Joint Code of Practice for Fire Prevention on Construction Sites. One of the most widely used of our publications, I'd suggest, and one that we have to tread very carefully with. It's published jointly with the Contractors Legal Group, who used to be the Construction Confederation. I think that's correct. Yes, that is correct. They used to be the Construction Confederation, but they represent the contractor side of the market, alongside RISCAuthority representing the insurer side. And there's an awful lot of liaison that goes into reviewing and updating that particular document to make sure that it continues to meet the needs of both sides. We have a business resilience guide which we published. That's now sitting with the business continuity working group, which Dominic convenes. We've got a code of practice for the protection of empty buildings, which we developed. There is fire risk management guidance for the food industry, which was published jointly with the Food Industry Panels Group. And we did a briefing note on e-cigarettes. Again, that's not from a health and safety risk. From those of you who've seen it will recognise that it's principally to do with the charging of e-cigarettes. I think we're finding more and more now that so many devices come with chargers which can be plugged into USB-type plugs, and mixing and matching them doesn't seem to be probably the best thing that you can do. And certainly, if you're using non-proprietary products, they can often lead to real significant problems. So we focused on the e-cigarettes because Fire and Rescue Services have been doing a little bit of research, and there are some videos online that show these devices exploding or sparking quite furiously. But you know, moving forward, it may well be that document's readdressed to look at charging of small electronic items in a more generic way. And in developing all of these documents, we work in collaboration with other groups. We don't just do our own thing, and I don't just mean internally within the RISCAuthority family, but also externally. You mentioned the Contractors Legal Group that we work with on the Joint Code of Practice, but we've also worked with the Food Industry Panels Group. We've worked with BISRIA on the extract duct cleaning risk control document. We've worked with BAMA on aerosols, BAFSA on the Legionella document, CFOA on the Photovoltaics document and on the Fire Detection Alarm Systems document, and also with London Fire Brigade on the document we produce on acetylene. So we try wherever necessary and wherever possible to consult on these documents with the right organisations, not the world and its wife, but with the right organisations, because we think that really strengthens what we publish in the end. We maintain a prioritised work programme that the steering group gets to look at on a regular basis and make some decisions about what needs to be looked at next. I'm sorry that image on the screen isn't particularly brilliant, but for some strange reason I couldn't work out how to import a Word document yesterday, so I just took a screenshot and cropped it. But at the document exists if anybody wants to see it, and we'd always welcome input into it. But the document is really there as an aide-memoire for the steering group, so they can see what's current, what's not, what's going out of date, and what may be in more urgent need of attention. And it's beautifully colour-coded just to make it nice and simple for me, which is always very, very helpful. And it also allows us to respond promptly to emerging issues, because we can look at where we are with certain things, what the programme looks like moving forward, and ensure that we're tackling things in a timely way. One of the real difficulties that we have, although I think we manage it reasonably effectively, is balancing the need to keep existing RC documents up to date, whilst at the same time developing the new ones that deal with emerging issues. So just looking very quickly at some of those we've been working on recently and have been recently completed. Fire safety with PV panels. I'll be talking in a little more detail about that momentarily. That's correlated with the current IET guidance. recommendations for minimising impact of Legionella on firefighting systems. I mentioned that earlier. Recommendations for storage, use and handling of industrial gases and cylinders. That's recently been updated and was passed for press this week, as was a revised version of RC49, which deals with acetylene cylinders involved in fire. And again, I'll touch on that a little bit later. And then we have RC60, which is recommendations for fire safety with food smoking kilns. And again, that's another one that was passed for press just this week. Other documents that remain in progress, both new and those existing, which are being updated. We have fire risk assessment of catering extract ventilation that needs to be amended to reflect changes that have recently been made to what was HVAC. They're now called the Building and Engineering Services Association, but they have a publication called TR19, which is a sort of an industry bible. So we need to reflect within RC44 the changes that have happened there. There's one other issue which I'll touch on in a moment. RC64, manufacture, storage and use of biomass fuel pellets. We've approved the proposal for that, but we've yet to start any work. One of the issues in that respect is that we're waiting on the publication of an ISO standard, which we need to tie this into, and without it, we would probably be taking a bit of too much of a punt, really. We've got a document for fire safety in 3D printing. We've looked at the initial draft internally, and that's just being updated before the working group get an opportunity to review it formally. And then RC66, shed a little tear for this one, an idea that was proposed by the risk control group, but has now been sucked away by the passive working group to develop. And I'll touch on that very, very briefly a little bit later on, just to rub in my indignation. Okay, other documents in progress and documents that we've prioritised for update. RC26, Organic Thermal Fluid Heating Systems, bit of a mouthful, but not one of the longest titles we have. RC15, Use of Portable and Transportable Space Heaters. 37, the Control of Hazards from Electrical Lighting. And then RC61, which is a relatively new document in real terms, but it covers recommendations for battery hazards. But it's been suggested that it probably needs another look at, on the basis that issues with regard to lithium battery hazards seem to have become more prevalent recently, and you've probably seen some of the news reports and videos that have come out. So we're just looking at the need to update that to make sure it's current and remains fit for purpose. And then there's one new document that was proposed quite recently, which was fire safety with electrical cables, also considering firefighter safety. We looked at that proposal at our last meeting and agreed a way forward with it. And then some of the other bits and pieces that we're involved in, not just the production of documents, but kitchen extract ductwork cleaning has been something of a concern for the steering group for quite some while, and we published a document on fire risk assessment for extract cleaning, or cleaning of extract ductwork, particularly from kitchens, which I referred to on an earlier slide. However, we've been working with Loss Prevention Certification Board towards a certification scheme for extract ductwork. Progress so far is they've done all the research trials, they've developed the draft document, it's been out for consultation, and they're now just considering internally I suppose the validation of that document and its availability more widely. I'm sure you're all familiar with the concerns associated with kitchen extract ductwork and fires therein. We're aware that there is an existing scheme for certification of cleaners of kitchen extract ductwork, which is held by the Building and Engineering Services Association. However, research that was done outside of RISCAuthority indicated that a number of fires caused or resulting from build-up of grease in kitchen extract ductwork were as a result of poor cleaning that had been done by some members of that particular organisation, and so the decision was taken to look elsewhere for developing a better scheme. We did speak to BNES about developing their scheme. Sadly, those talks broke down. so yes, so we've discussed it with LPCB. They were very keen to take it forward. A small steering group was put together to develop the document and support that work, and RISCAuthority and Risk Control Working Group have been actively involved in it. And just some of the other things that we are supporting. There's a project being headed by BRE on DECC solar PV statistics and an investigation. We're helping that. We're supporting the development of an IET code of practice for electrical safety management, and we're also working with the Thermography Industry Association, and there's one other whose acronym I can't recollect at the moment, but it's looking at an approval scheme for thermographers. It's been accepted. I think that thermal imaging cameras are quite widely available now, and their use clearly is key in ensuring that adequate levels of safety are maintained with electrical installations. But there's been a plethora of new organisations joining the market, and one-man bands developing their own schemes and pushing their own services forward, and they may not necessarily be using the right equipment or even necessarily understand how to interpret the results correctly, and so it felt appropriate for us to help support that. Okay, so moving on from the generally good stuff that we do and how we do it, I just wanted to take a quick look at some of the more recent documents that we've published and those that we're working on at the moment, just to give you a bit of a feel for exactly what they are and what they cover. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but hopefully give you a bit of a feel for each of them. RC62 covers recommendations for fire safety with photovoltaic panel installations, and this was really developed on the basis that I think that while the government were offering such great tariffs for the sale of electricity back to the grid, it became a very, very popular installation, and the work was being undertaken by rafts of people who may not necessarily have had the right qualifications, experience or competency, and there was very little guidance available which would really support them and support the end users in ensuring that their installation was fit for purpose. And I think it's given us an opportunity to have a look around the issue in a bit more detail and come up with some really good guidance that supports not just their design and installation, but also their ongoing management, and also considers the risk to firefighters, which I think is very important as well. So it provides background information and guidance on the installation of panels on commercial and industrial premises. They may the recommendations may be just as relevant to some larger domestic installations, but primarily it's focused on commercial and industrial premises, and looks at things like location and fitting, electrical safety, particularly where it has an impact on the prevention of fires, the mitigation of threats to life and property loss, and also business interruption. Safety of firefighters, as I mentioned earlier, particularly associated with the direct current side of the installation. I'll touch on that in a bit more detail in a moment. And there's also an emphasis made on the need for systems, including freestanding arrays, because they're not always, as I'm sure you know, installed on buildings, but sometimes in large rural sites, to be carefully designed, properly installed by competent persons and protected, because clearly the panels are worth a few bob. Or certainly the materials they're manufactured from are. Some of the key points around planning, for example, is to review existing fire risk assessments, because just plonking a series of panels on the roof of a building may not seem to be a particular issue from a fire safety perspective. And if the fire risk assessment, which of course is driven by life safety requirements, doesn't address them, then it probably needs to, not just because you're putting stuff on the roof, which may impact on firefighting, for example, not particularly a concern from a life safety means of escape aspect, but certainly if you're going to start drilling holes in buildings to run cabling and such like, or you're going to breach compartment walls, or you're going to breach compartment lines, then that needs to be addressed. And then there's also a recommendation to review any assessments that have been made under the Dangerous Substances and Explosive Atmospheres regulations on the basis that the installation of PV is going to require consideration, particularly with regard to the zoning of the site and the use of EX-rated equipment. When it comes to design, obviously economics would recommend the largest possible installation, but we felt it was appropriate to make sure that where they're installed on roofs, that adequate access is maintained for maintenance and for any other works that need to be done on the roof. It's great to cover your roof with panels, but if you can't get up there to maintain them or do any essential maintenance to the roof of the building, then clearly that's going to cause problems. And where you're integrating panels into the structure or the fabric of the building, you need to make sure that the fire-related properties of the elements of the structure are going to remain compliant with building legislation, particularly with regard to things like external fire spread. There are a vast range of products now. I know that we're all quite familiar with seeing these documents, seeing these panels attached to the roof of buildings, but there are all kinds of different products now that go to make up roofing tiles, glazing, facades, skylights, and it's not uncommon to see panels installed on the face of a building now rather than on the roof. The use of thin-film photovoltaics in different places all add different risks and different elements of risk into the construction, and so obviously need to be considered as part of that process. When it comes to safety, provision of a switch in a prominent location which is easily accessible so that firefighters can disable or isolate the DC side of the panel system to ensure their safety in real terms, and also to be aware that the panels produce current not just from daylight but also from other light sources, so from street lighting or flood lighting, and there were a number of instances where installers who were working hard to install as much or as many installations as they could, whilst times were good as far as the feed-in tariffs were concerned and the funding that was provided by government, and they were working all hours, and so would be using floodlit sites to work on. Some of them unaware that flood lighting will also create a DC charge through the panels, and a number of people got hurt as a result of it. And then following the installation, recommendations with regard to hot work, and that following their installation, any work on roofs should be subject to a permit to work system for obvious reasons. Some of the other issues that we've addressed within the document is that ensuring that unprotected cables and the panel arrays themselves don't straddle compartment walls. So if you've got a compartment line running up through a building with the appropriate fire breaks at roof level, you've got to be ensured that we're not bridging that gap with the installation of the panels or the cabling. Considering during the design phase, if you're installing large panel arrays in agricultural land or any kind of external location on the ground, that the site's not likely to flood. And also to consider roof loadings. Just adding panels to a roof may be enough to cause it to collapse or at least weaken it. And then certainly if it snows, that can add additional load, which, as you can see from the photograph on the right-hand side, it's called this particular roof to collapse. We've recommended thermographic examination, as you would expect, not just of the panels but the inverters and other relevant parts of the installation. Securing large sites where you've got freestanding arrays, security fencing and CCTV, and also the marking of panels to aid their identification if at any point they're stolen. When it comes to the fire and rescue side of things, we've also got to consider the fire resistance of the building and the potential for firefighters to get hurt and their ability to tackle the fire effectively. Talked earlier about the potential for banging holes into the walls of buildings and the problems that can cause from allowing fire to spread internally. But externally, if you're piling panels on your roof, a firefighter squirting water onto it is just going to find the water bouncing back away from him, not necessarily getting to where it needs to get to. So we have to ensure that there's appropriate access, that information is provided to the fire and rescue services so they know what they're walking into, as it were. Providing a fire service switch to isolate the DC side, as was mentioned earlier, And because the array on a roof, particularly on a flat roof, may not be obvious, providing appropriate signage so that they can easily and quickly identify the fact that there's PV panels on the roof. So a quick run through of that particular document. I'm going to look very quickly at where we are so far with RC60, just passed for press. This covers fire safety with food smoking processes. Quite obscure. I wouldn't suggest it's an interesting read, but like most of our risk control documents, if you don't need them for the technical content, they're a surefire cure for insomnia. But these recommendations are simply about providing advice for food smoking, both in modern factory settings and also with traditional kilns. Again, we're talking about the more industrial side of the market than the local home smoker. I'm not sure if that's the term you'd use anyway, but I've made it up if it isn't. And it's just about good management, really, of a process that's involves the generation of smoke. And you might think, well, there's not too much to worry about there. But from a fire safety perspective and the potential for false alarms, clearly, if you've got smoke in the workplace, you've got problems that need to be considered. A diagram there that shows the essential elements of a smoke box. I don't think all of them are necessarily in a configuration that you'll always find, because clearly in some locations you're going to have heating elements that sit beneath the smoke box itself. But you can see from this particular layout, and this diagram's reproduced in the document itself, you produce some smoke, you pump it through a chamber where the foodstuffs are hanging, then you suck it out and you blow it away, in the real simplest of terms. And in this particular figuration, you've got fans which can work in either direction, either to bring fresh air in or extract and exhaust the smoke to fresh air once it's not required. So relatively straightforward, but that's an indicative layout, not necessarily what you'll find everywhere, but at least it gives us a bit of a feel for how these things function. The key points are about compliance with the law, not just a traditional life safety fire risk assessment, but also considering the potential for explosive or flammable atmospheres if carbon monoxide is given off through the storage of fuel pellets. And then looking at business continuity, making sure that you've taken all the necessary steps to manage and maintain the premises in such a way that it remains safe and that business can continue even in the event of a problem. With smoking processes, some of them do continue while premises are unattended, overnight or at weekends. So implications in that respect have to be considered. We do, of course, have a risk control document number 42, which covers unattended processes, which is referred to a couple of occasions within this particular document to drive people towards some specific advice which will assist. And then when it comes to the key points, the fire safety management issues, relatively straightforward, the sorts of things you'd probably expect to be there, keeping the stocks of materials in the processing area to a minimum, training of staff, locating the equipment preferably in a separate fire-resistant compartment, and agreeing the fire rating of that compartment with insurers. Where you've got fuels, you should be storing those outside the building and only keeping sufficient materials inside for what you need on a daily or a shift basis. And then when it comes to the ductwork and exhaust flues and ventilation and such like, constructing them suitably and making sure that you're not producing a grease trap, that there's the potential for huge amounts of grease with certain types of processes, but with some others there certainly will be. And when it comes to the storage of the wood chips outside, if you're keeping quantities of them, then probably also need to consider the risks from self-heating and the potential for spontaneous combustion. With traditional smoking kilns, where they're installed within a factory premises or built into a factory premises, they need to be located preferably on an external wall and open directly to the outside rather than internally. Helps to provide suitable subdivision. And again, when it comes to the fire resistance of the structure which surrounds them, recommendations that the rating is agreed with the insurer. It'd be nice to think it was relatively straightforward, but I think there are wider risk issues which need to be addressed rather than just prescribing something off the cuff. Then with regard to fire protection, making sure that suitable detection is provided, ensuring that preferably multiple sensors are used, or those that are able to detect multiple phenomena, including smoke, heat and carbon monoxide, on the basis that what you want to try and do in a potentially smoky environment is reduce the potential for false alarm activations. Yes, the smoke box might be shut most of the time, but on opening the doors there's bound to be a release of some smoke into the wider workplace. Having high temperature alarms in ductwork, exhaust flues, the smoke generator and the smoke chamber, just to make sure that if there is an incident, a fire or any significantly increased temperature, that's addressed quickly. And then having automatic suppression, depending on the nature of the risks, steam, sprinklers, water mists, within the ductwork, the flues, the generator and the smoke box, and then and also making sure that the extract ductwork and flues and such like are effectively cleaned, much like you would consider with kitchen extract ductwork. Again, the build-up of grease may be very different depending on what's being smoked, and the process, because cold smoking will produce far less than hot smoking would do, but it still needs to be considered in the round. The third document to talk about is RC65, Additive Manufacturing, I've titled it. But as you'll see from the image, what we're really talking about is 3D printing. This is one of those emerging technologies that the steering group felt it was right to address now. Now, with any new document of this nature, there's a decision to be made. You recognise that you're producing something that's correct for a moment in time, but where there's a technology that's moving quickly, you also have to realise, I suppose, that it might go out of date very, very quickly as technologies emerge. But 3D printing's been around for quite some time, and some of the technologies are quite well developed and quite well advanced. But it is one of those documents that we will need to ensure we keep on top of. If we were to leave it as just a generic type document, it would really cover very little more than what you do with an unattended process involving electricity and combustible materials. But as it is, I think that the document's going to develop to consider some of the specifics associated with the different types of processes, and I'll touch on those in a few moments. The document covers business continuity, siting, fire safety management, fire protection, training of staff as the principal issues. But looking at it in more detail, what's the process about? Well, originally 3D printing, or the term 3D printing or additive manufacturing, described a process that deposits a binder material into a powder bed with an inkjet printer head, layer by layer. More recently, the term's been used to encompass a far wider variety of additive manufacturing techniques. They generally, nowadays, build components by depositing thin layers of material and fusing them together by heating, sometimes or often by the use of lasers. The building material is typically fine, such as powdered metals, plastics, ceramics or glass. But the technology used by most 3D printers today is the fused deposition modelling, where you're building something from the ground up on a flat bed. Although there are other ways of doing it, and this deposition modelling is a special application of a plastic extrusion. There's just a slide there that highlights some of the different processes. Some of them have fantastic titles: stereolithography, electron beam freeform fabrication, one of my favourites. But if you're looking at the materials on the right-hand side, you can obviously understand where an element of risk comes in very, very quickly. Using edible materials, even for some manufacturing, but there is also things, also products, metal alloys, powdered polymers, titanium alloys. So using powdered metals, using powdered plastics is obviously going to cause the potential for significant risk from something quite obtuse like a dust cloud explosion if the materials are allowed to mix freely with air, and so those sorts of things will also need to be addressed. under robocasting or direct linking writing, or direct link writing, they use a product in some circumstances called Cermet, which, as the name would suggest, is a composite of a ceramic and a metal. Not necessarily a space age material, but certainly one that they're thinking of using to line spacecraft to shield them from debris hitting them, but more traditionally used in producing electronics and electronic resistors and capacitors and such like. So clearly, if you're using powdered metals, powdered plastics, there is the potential for dust explosions. There might be the need to hazard zone the space, and there might be the need to use EX-rated components. If somebody's installing a new 3D printer into their premises, is that the kind of thing they're likely to consider? Maybe not. Principal risks are, because one, it's an unattended process, so it's the potential to be, the malfunction of the machinery themselves. As a steering group, we had the opportunity to go and look at some 3D printing equipment in Brackley, where an organisation were using it to support the F1 racing teams in that location, and it was interesting to see some of the plastic extrusion work that they were doing there, where the print heads, if they malfunctioned or if the print head hit the product it was creating, it would send it into a bit of a tizzy, to be perfectly honest, and eventually it would just produce spaghetti, which it splayed about through the print space, and so that needs to be watched for. Concerns with regard to the printing medium, which we just discussed, and its storage, not just its use. And then there are associated processes which also need to be considered. We saw in our site visit that the process can often use the use of two different materials in printing. So you're printing with the product that you're trying to create the object out of, and then you're also printing with a support material which ensures that the product is stable during the printing process and doesn't fall over, which could also be another cause for the spaghetti-like explosion that occurs with this particular type of printing, that is. That material then needs to be dissolved off the finished product afterwards to create the finished item. But we also saw that material was being used to create this redundant material is being used to create shapes that were then coated with a carbon fibre to create specific products. So people are using these machines in quite novel and unique ways, and it's those kinds of issues that we need to be in a position to be able to address. You can just see some of the photos there. Linking some machines together may also be an issue where, and in circumstances where you're bulk printing product, you've got processes running unattended for quite some time. On the left-hand side, you can see a process whereby the product is built up from the metal or the plastic powder through the use of lasers, and then on the right-hand side, a plastic that's been used through the plastic extrusion route. Some of the key points are focused on business continuity, not just for the equipment itself, but also for the computer software and the computer files which drive the sites, making sure you've got copies held off-site, and making sure that as an unattended process you're addressing the risks associated there effectively. From a fire safety management perspective, relatively quite straightforward, but making sure the machinery is functioning effectively before you leave it to run unattended. Thinking about earthing and bonding, where there's a static electricity risk where you're pouring and transferring powdered materials, or even liquid plastics. And then their location, effectively siting them, compartmenting them where possible, and making sure you're not storing combustible materials in close proximity. When it comes to fire protection, again, making sure you've got a suitable fire detection alarm system linked to a receiving centre if the process is left run unattended, and making sure you've got suitable suppression, not just in the work environment, but that's going to cover the potential for a fire within the space itself, but also making sure that you're detecting that effectively, depending on the nature of the risks that are associated with that particular printing process. But in certain smaller and enclosed printers, you might be able to install proprietary system that delivers an extinguishing agent locally, which is obviously going to do less harm in broad terms across the site. RC66, I mentioned this earlier. This is the document that's been stolen away from the Risk Control Steering Group by the Passive Working Group, and probably quite rightly. I'm being a little bit unkind. But it's to do with fire safety management of composite panels, not just their design and installation, but it's thought that within the existing suite of documents that we have within RISCAuthority, although we talk about composite panels and their use in quite some detail in certain locations, particularly within design guide type documents and such like, there's nothing really which addresses the issues associated with design, installation and their ongoing management. And so this will be a really good addition to the spectrum of work. The principal issues that the document's going to consider: whole life considerations, so from their selection, their installation, and their management and demolition. Looking at stability and the factors which may impact on a dynamic risk assessment done by a fire and rescue service if they need to tackle a fire in the location. Giving an indication as to how you can identify what the panel contains by way of an insulating material. Not always the easiest things to identify. And then looking at hazards arising from their design and potentially the quality of construction if they've been done particularly badly. Looking at joints and corners and thermal bridging and those sorts of things, and other issues associated to their delamination. It's not uncommon in food industry premises to find ceilings created from panels and them to be walked across quite frequently to access services and ductwork and such like. And they very, very quickly become damaged if they're not properly protected. And then also looking at things associated with, or issues associated with any sort of maintenance work, or where the panels need to be punctured to allow for the installation of services, and making sure that where that's done, it's done effectively, it's done safely, and that the resultant repair is done in such a way that it's going to protect the panels going forward. One other document which I mentioned earlier, which is with regard to electricity and fire safety. You may recollect that, well, I've not given it a number yet, that's why it's called 60 ? I'm not quite sure whether the Passive Working Group want to use the RC66 name at the moment, or whether they're going to give it their own title. Dominic's pulling faces at me and nodding his head, which tends to suggest that it will not be RC66 for very much longer. So this will probably be RC66 moving forward. But you may remember the Shirley Towers incident that happened in 2010. 2 firefighters died as a result of becoming entangled in cabling that fell during a fire in the premises. The next slide just shows an image of what it looked like inside, the photos from Hampshire Fire and Rescue Service. But that's not the only incident. There have been many others. A fire in 2005 in Stevenage, flat fire on the 14th floor, the death of a firefighter in that location because the plastic trunking melted, the cables descended and trapped them. Particularly dangerous, obviously, in a smoke-filled environment where seeing where you're going is absolutely essential. And the principal issues that we've highlighted for consideration: management of mains electricity, routing of cables, periodic testing and inspections, as you would expect, and then looking at some of the other electrical safety issues that may need to be considered, including those for panel installations and battery-powered systems and such side, alongside the installation of the cabling itself and how it all functions. Two other documents recently updated. These have just been passed for press, and so you should be receiving hard copies soon and electronic copies available sooner, I'd anticipate. RC88 has been updated just to make sure it's cognizant of current legislation and best practice. RC49 has been addressed. For those of you who are familiar with the document, you'll remember that previously it was dealing principally with business continuity type issues, on the basis that if you have a fire involving an acetylene cylinder, the fire and rescue services are going to put a 200-metre hazard zone in place and stop you going into it for the best part of 24 hours. But it was decided the document needed to be a little more detailed and cover all of the risks associated with the use and storage of acetylene. And so it's a fairly major revision to that document, but as I said, that will be out shortly. Just a few other things in wrapping up. Just a reminder that all of these documents are free to download from the RISCAuthority website. If you don't receive printed copies, then you need to speak to your RISCAuthority representative and make sure that they're getting additional copies or sufficient copies for everybody. But they are free to download from the RISCAuthority website, and in doing so, you're going to make sure that you've got the most up-to-date publication on every occasion. We have been discussing here about the potential for keeping some documents where technology changes quickly, such as with 3D printing, having a published copy now and then updating the online copy as we need to. Obviously, we'll inform everybody it's been updated, but at least we'll know then that we've got a document that's fit for purpose and touches on all the key issues going forward. And there's a list there of everything that the library contains. Top 20 downloads or top 12 downloads in 2015. Dominic extracted this data. I think he's in the process of extracting more up to date. But from a risk control working group perspective, they're the top 12 downloads, and most of those appear within the top 20 of all downloads from the RISCAuthority website. RC7 recommendations for hot work is the most popular document. I couldn't say by far, but it's certainly at the top of the list, and we all deserve a good pat on the back for that. One of the things that's absolutely key to us going forward is suggestions for new guidance and eyes and feet on the ground, as it were. Yes, we've got broad engagement from insurers on the steering group, and that ensures that we do keep up to date with what's changing, what's moving, what needs to be addressed, what we need to tackle next, what's emerging as an issue that we need to deal with. But we're always open to suggestions. So if you've got any particular suggestions for documents that either need updating or may need adapting or augmenting, or for emerging risks that you're identifying where you're out and about, or that customers and clients are reporting to you, then please feel free to push them through to us. They'll be discussed at the next risk control group meeting, and decisions taken on how we move those forward. Email RISCAuthority or riskcontrol@riscauthority.co.uk, a monitored mailbox that both Dominic and I and others have access to. So if you have any bright ideas, please feel free to drop us a line, or alternatively just look for our phone numbers and give us a call for a chat. We're always happy to discuss these sorts of things. So I thank you for listening. Before we go, I just wanted to highlight the RISCAuthority London seminar, happening on the 17th of October, just a couple of weeks away now. Over 160 members are already registered to date. Bookings close on the 10th, so if you've not registered and you'd like to come, then please do so quickly. You can look at the programme and book online through the RISCAuthority website, which you can see highlighted on the screen there. And pleased to say that it's also CII accredited for those of you who are counting your points. Other than next questions, just to highlight or any questions you might have, just to highlight the next webinar topic, which covers latest research on thatch fires and new guidance that's being produced. And our very own Dr. Jim Glockling will be covering that. Clearly an issue for him on the basis that he lives in a thatch property. Yes, if you've not got anything better to do on the 11th of November and you've been interested in thatch, then the RISCAuthority webinar is the place to be. So thanks very much for listening. I'm just going to have a look and see what we've got by way of questions, and anything that I feel I can answer I'll shout out to. Is it possible to have the full list of RC documents on the website in numerical order that will link direct to the document? It's sometimes awkward to navigate the document we require through the current menus. I'm about to turn the phone away from me and towards Dominic while he answers this question for you.
Who's that question from, Harry?
It says unassigned. It's somebody who's...
Oh, Harry.
No, Harry Campbell.
Harry Campbell. Harry, I'll have a look at that. The request form, when we were building the new website, there was a request that we divide the range of risk control documents by topic. we found it easy that you could relate associated documents, as you have heard through Howard's presentation. A lot of the documents refer to other ones, such as like unattended processes and stuff. So it felt like by grouping them together into a topical area, we group all our security documents together, for instance. We do ones on, I can't remember off the top of my head, on certain processes or, certain trends. But I'll have a look at that and just see if we can perhaps just do a complete menu. But as long as you click on find the right document, it opens up automatically, and there's lots of sharing and link options there available as well.
Okay. I've had a query from Gillian at HDI. Although it says Norman after their name. I'm not quite sure why, but anyway, thanks for the question. About the approval of thermographers, how would this impact on businesses that have invested in their own equipment to undertake in-house inspections? Would their personnel also need to be approved, or would in-house testing become disregarded? The scheme is, as far as we're aware, is very much in its earliest stages. I had a meeting with representatives from the, I can't think of the name of the thermography Industry Association, but it's probably the Thermography Industry Association. But they're part of something called the British Institute of Non-Destructive Testing, which you've probably heard of. They already have a scheme for thermography and thermographers, but it only recognises one particular training course. And the idea of this particular approach, so we understand, is to ensure that individuals who have received training from elsewhere can also gain approval. So I don't think it's necessarily going to be a case of those who do their own internal thermography work being not approved. I think what it does is widens the potential for those individuals to become approved through whatever training that they've had to date. No doubt the scheme will have to consider prior learning and grandfather rights and these sorts of things. But I only met in the last 2 weeks with these particular individuals to talk about it, discussed it with the steering group last week, and they've said yes, it's something that we're happy to continue inputting into as necessary. So I think there's a bit more work to be done yet before we're absolutely clear on what the scheme will look like. But we will, of course, keep people updated. Thanks very much for that question. Other than that, I think that's it. So thank you all very much for attending, participating. Have a lovely weekend, and see you all next time. Thanks then. Bye-bye.